The snowstorm came without warning. 1 minute, the sky was a dull gray, and the roads were just wet. The next, a blinding white curtain had fallen over the world, and my car was sliding helplessly on the ice. I tried to steer, tried to brake, but the tires lost traction, and before I knew it, I was wedged against a snowbank, my wheels spinning uselessly. I fumbled with my phone, hoping I had service, but all I could see was the spinning signal icon. Panic started to creep in. I was alone, stranded in the middle of nowhere, the wind cutting through my jacket like knives. That's when I heard her voice. "Are you okay?" I looked up and saw my best friend's mom, bundled in a thick coat, her scarf wrapped tightly around her face, eyes wide with concern. Snowflakes clung to her hair, and her breath came in soft clouds, but despite the cold, she looked calm, strong, somehow, in the way she carried herself. "We'll have to keep each other warm," she said with a half-smile that made my chest tighten. There was a teasing undertone, but I could feel the seriousness behind it. The storm wasn't just bad, it was dangerous. I wanted to argue, to insist that I could manage, but the truth was impossible to ignore. My teeth were chattering, my fingers numb despite my gloves. "Yeah, I guess you're right," I admitted, my voice shaky. She nodded, eyes scanning the empty road. "There's some trees a little way up the road. Not much cover, but better than standing here in the open." Together, we trudged through the snow, each step sinking into drifts that reached our knees in places. The wind whipped around us, tugging at our coats and scarves, stealing our warmth, but we didn't speak much. Words were pointless in the face of the cold. The silence between us was punctuated only by the crunch of snow underfoot. Finally, we reached a grove of trees. The trunks formed a barrier against the wind, a small pocket of quiet in the chaos of the storm. She glanced around, then turned to me, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Here," she said, gesturing to a small hollow where the snow wasn't as deep. "We can at least sit and try to stay warm." We sat, backs to the tree trunks, close enough that our shoulders brushed. The cold was relentless, but body heat was a surprisingly effective shield. She shivered slightly, and instinctively, I moved closer. "You're freezing," she murmured, wrapping her arms around me in a hug that was meant to be practical but sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with temperature. I hugged her back, careful, conscious of the closeness, conscious of every subtle brush of skin against skin. The world outside the trees faded into a blur of white. I could see the snow clinging to her eyelashes, the way her hair curled slightly around her scarf. Her presence was overwhelming, comforting, dangerous in the best possible way. My heart thumped in my chest, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. "Thanks," I muttered, not meeting her eyes. The words felt inadequate, too small for the sudden intensity of the moment. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed out of place in the storm but made it feel warmer somehow. "I guess we're stuck like this for a while," she said, letting the words hang between us. Her breath brushed my ear, and I felt an odd thrill that made me tense involuntarily. For a while, we simply sat, huddled together, letting the cold seep away with each shared inch of warmth. She talked in small, distracting ways, about mundane things, work, the roads, the weather, but her voice was soothing, grounding me in a way I didn't expect. I tried to respond, to match her calmness, but my mind kept wandering to the curve of her smile, the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the winter air, the way her hair fell loosely over her shoulder. Hours, or maybe just minutes, time seemed to blur, past. The snowstorm raged outside, but in that little hollow, there was a fragile peace. I caught her hand once, a fleeting touch meant to steady her as she shifted against me, and the jolt it sent through me was undeniable. She didn't pull away, just let our fingers brush, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension that neither of us admitted aloud. At one point, she leaned back against me, her head resting briefly on my shoulder. "You're warmer than I expected," she said softly, a teasing note in her tone. But there was more there, something unspoken, something that made the air between us crackle with possibility. "I could say the same," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. The closeness was intoxicating, and I was painfully aware of every inch of her body pressed near mine. We laughed quietly at our shared awkwardness, trying to make light of the tension, but every laugh, every glance, seemed to pull us closer together. The storm outside seemed irrelevant compared to the storm of feelings simmering between us. Eventually, the cold became almost unbearable, and we had no choice but to move closer, to share what little body heat we had left. Our knees brushed, our hands found each other again, fingers intertwining almost naturally. The world shrank to the two of us in that tiny grove, snow falling like silent witnesses to a moment that neither of us fully understood, yet both of us felt deeply. "I never thought I'd be stuck in a snowstorm like this," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. She glanced at me, eyes searching, and for a second, I felt exposed, like she could see all the thoughts I hadn't even admitted to myself. "Me neither," I admitted, and the words felt heavy with meaning. Not about the storm, not about being stranded, but about her, about this closeness, about the dangerous pull I felt toward her. She smiled, a small, secretive smile, and I realized I was smiling too, despite the cold, despite the fear, despite everything. The storm had forced us together, yes, but in doing so, it had revealed something neither of us could ignore. The night stretched on. The wind howled outside, the snow piled higher, but in that hollow, there was only warmth, only the quiet intimacy of shared struggle, of unspoken attraction. Every touch, every laugh, every glance built a tension that neither of us dared to break, yet both of us silently hoped would continue. And in that moment, I knew, no matter what happened next, no matter how dangerous the storm, no matter how impossible the situation, the night would change everything. For the first time, I saw her not just as my best friend's mom, not just as someone I knew from the edges of my life, but as someone who could mean so much more. The snow fell, relentless and beautiful, and we stayed there, huddled together, sharing warmth in a storm that had brought us closer than either of us could have imagined. The storm hadn't relented. By the time the night fully settled in, the snow had buried the road completely, leaving us trapped in a quiet, icy world where the only movement came from the trees swaying under the weight of white. My fingers were stiff inside my gloves, my nose numb, but somehow the cold felt less dangerous than the pull of her presence beside me. She shifted slightly closer, as if sensing the same unspoken truth that had been hanging between us since we'd huddled together. Her arm brushed mine, lightly, almost accidentally, but my chest thumped in response as if it had heard a signal. I could feel her warmth radiating through the thick fabric of our coats, and every instinct in my body urged me to inch closer, to let this strange, forbidden closeness exist for just a little longer. "We should try to conserve our energy," she said softly, but there was no reprimand in her tone. Only a quiet pragmatism that made the situation seem less scary, almost intimate. Her hair fell over her shoulder in soft waves, dusted with snow, and I couldn't help but notice the way her eyelashes clung together from the flakes, the curve of her jaw illuminated by the dim light filtering through the trees. I swallowed hard. "Right," I said, but my words sounded weak even to my own ears. I wanted to tell her that I hadn't been able to stop noticing her all night, that every accidental touch had left a strange heat creeping up my chest. But I couldn't. I didn't dare. We settled into a rhythm, small talk to pass the time, shifting slightly to stay warm, laughter that felt fragile against the roar of the wind outside. Every glance lingered a beat too long. Every laugh carried a note of tension that neither of us acknowledged aloud. And yet, the connection between us grew, subtle and insistent, like a current beneath a frozen lake. At one point, she rested her head against my shoulder again, just briefly, and I felt a spark that startled me. I froze, afraid that any movement would ruin the delicate balance we'd created. But she didn't move away. She just stayed there, letting her warmth seep into me, letting me feel hers in return. My mind spun with thoughts I couldn't speak, with impulses I dared not act on, yet every fiber of me wanted to. "Do you want to try and build a little more shelter?" she asked after a long silence, her voice breaking slightly through the wind. I nodded, grateful for the excuse to move, to touch her in a way that felt innocent but was anything but. We gathered branches, leaning close as we worked together, our shoulders brushing repeatedly, fingers tangling as we passed pieces of wood to one another. Each contact sent a subtle shock through me, a reminder of how dangerously close we were. She laughed softly when we knocked a pile of snow onto each other by accident, and the sound, light, genuine, intimate, made my chest ache. Once the makeshift shelter was up, a fragile wall of branches that barely blocked the wind, we huddled inside, knees pressed together, backs leaning against the woven snow-laden branches. The cold had become unbearable again, and instinctively, we moved closer. Our bodies touched more fully this time, and I could feel her warmth in every part of me. She rested her head against my chest, and I could feel the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the pulse at her neck. "Thanks for being here," she murmured, her voice soft enough that it might have been carried away by the wind if I hadn't been listening so intently. "I didn't expect to." Her words broke off, swallowed by the storm. I placed a hand lightly on hers, over the thick glove, and she didn't pull away. "Neither did I whispered, the words almost lost in the cold, but heavy with meaning. A quiet settled over us, the kind of silence that stretches between two people who can't, or won't, speak the full truth. And yet, the silence itself was intimate. It carried more than words could, a tension built from shared warmth, shared vulnerability, and the undeniable spark that had grown between us in the last few hours. She shifted closer, just a fraction, and I felt her leg press against mine. My heart raced, not with fear but with anticipation, and I realized with startling clarity that every instinct in my body was aware of her. A slow, deliberate awareness that was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. I think we might actually make it through this," she said, her lips almost brushing my ear, sending a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "I think so too," I replied, my voice low. Almost a growl against the wind outside. The storm continued to rage, but in our small shelter, the world had shrunk to the space between us. Every accidental touch, every brush of her hand, every shared shiver felt charged with something deeper, more urgent. I could feel the tension coiling between us like a spring ready to snap, and for the first time, I realized I didn't want to snap it away. I wanted to let it linger. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. We spoke less, our words unnecessary now. The closeness, the warmth, the stolen glances, the brushes of our fingers, everything carried more weight than language could express. Her voice broke the quiet again. "Do you want to hold me?" she asked, tentative, almost shy. My chest tightened. My whole body wanted to say yes, wanted to respond to this unspoken invitation that had been simmering all night. "Yes," I said simply. No hesitation, no second guessing. She leaned fully into me, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, letting her warmth flow into me. Her head rested against my shoulder, and our bodies molded together as naturally as if they'd always belonged that way. The cold was still there, sharp at our extremities, but irrelevant compared to the heat building between us. We stayed like that, huddled together, listening to the storm outside, feeling the heartbeat of someone so impossibly close that it became the only thing that mattered. Every brush of her hair against my chest, every small movement, every whispered word carried a tension I couldn't, and didn't want to, escape. Finally, her voice broke the silence again, softer this time, almost a sigh. "I didn't think I'd ever end up here with you," she admitted, the confession hanging in the cold air like smoke. "Neither did I said, holding her tighter. "But I'm glad I did." And in the heart of the snowstorm, with the world buried under ice and white, something shifted between us. Not sudden, not explosive, but a slow, undeniable change. A connection forged in cold and danger, warmed by shared vulnerability and a tension that neither of us wanted to dissipate. The storm would eventually end. We would get out of that frozen grove. But that night, in the small, fragile shelter we had built together, nothing else mattered. Nothing except the heat we shared, the closeness that had grown between us, and the quiet understanding that everything had changed. I could feel it in the steady beat of her heart against mine. She could feel it too, I was sure of it, in the way she nestled closer, the way her hand fit perfectly in mine. The storm outside raged on, but inside, in that tiny, stolen world, we had found something rare, something that promised more than just survival. And somehow, I knew, no matter what came after, we would never forget this night, the night the snowstorm forced us to be together, and the night we discovered just how much warmth two people could share when the world outside was frozen solid.